slap in the courtroom, or the spark that ignites a revolution. When two racist police officers attack a meek black woman in the middle of a packed courtroom in Charleston, they think it's just another instance of reckless abuse of power. But what they don't know is, the woman is no ordinary witness. She is the judge, and just minutes later, everything they have concealed for decades will begin to crumble. This is a story of arrogance, hidden corruption, and a brand of justice that never whispers, but roars. Pay close attention, for what happens next will be so unbelievable you won't believe it until you see it with your own eyes. Outside the city courthouse, lawyers, judicial staff, and a few reporters are gathering, hurriedly preparing for what seems like just another routine trial. Little do they know, this will be the morning that changes the city's history forever. Inside courtroom 4, the atmosphere is unusually tense. Travis Boone, the white police officer known for his short, neat haircut, sharp features, and arrogant smirk, stands leaning against the prosecution's table, impatient. Beside him is the younger officer, Luke Hamilton, his subordinate, who follows Travis's orders like a shadow. "How much longer do we have to wait?" Travis snaps at the court clerk. He isn't used to waiting for anyone, especially in a city where his power is almost guaranteed. "Please be patient. Your Honor will be here shortly," the clerk responds softly, a nervous look on his face. Just then, the courtroom door opens. A middle-aged black woman walks in, standing tall, her silver-streaked hair neatly tied back, her face serene yet strong, her gaze unwavering. She wears a business suit but no judge's robe as is customary. Travis glances at her with disdain. To him, she's nothing more than an administrative worker, or maybe a lawyer's assistant. "Hey, you!" Travis barks, his voice brimming with arrogance and challenge. "Bring me the Jameson case files now." The woman stops, tilting her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as if assessing the nerve of the man who just spoke to her. She doesn't respond, merely walks toward a nearby table, picks up a file, and examines each page with a deliberate attention to detail. Her disregard stings Travis's pride. He strides toward her, his face reddening with anger. "Hey, I'm talking to you." When there's still no reply, Travis can't contain his rage. He raises his right hand and delivers a hard, violent slap. The sound rings out sharply, echoing through the room, making the entire courtroom shudder. Whispers immediately cease. The court clerk's mouth hangs open, reporters stop writing, other lawyers jump to their feet in shock, and Luke Hamilton, the younger officer, pales, sensing that something terrible is about to unfold. The woman stands still, her right cheek reddening from the slap, but her expression is unshaken. There is no sign of weakness, fear, or hesitation. Instead, she slowly turns her head, her gaze cutting through Travis's defiant face like a razor. "You should know your place if you want to keep your job," Travis sneers, though his tone falters as he begins to realize that something is terribly wrong. The woman doesn't respond. She calmly walks toward the judge's podium, each step resounding with cold, decisive authority, as if metal were striking marble. The room seems frozen, every eye fixed on her, holding its breath. Then she gently opens the small wooden door leading to the raised platform and deliberately dons the black robe of a judge. "Judge? Judge Carter?" the clerk whispers, trembling, hardly able to believe his eyes. Travis's heart skips a beat as he realizes the true identity of the woman he just struck. Luke Hamilton steps back, his face turning pale, as fear spreads across him. The room is dead silent, everyone holding their breath, eyes wide with astonishment and terror, all directed at the judge's bench. "Yes, I am Eleanor Carter." She speaks for the first time, her voice calm but commanding, each word clear and resonant, like the ringing of a bell in the absolute silence. "And I am the presiding judge of today's trial." Travis feels his legs weaken, cold sweat running down his temple. He had just slapped one of the most powerful judges, the first black woman in Charleston's history to sit on the bench, a living symbol of justice and strength. Eleanor slowly sits in the chair, her unwavering gaze locking onto Travis and Luke, the sound of the gavel striking the table echoing like a sentence for the two officers who had just lost everything in an instant. The trial has barely begun, but the great battle Eleanor Carter is about to wage against an entire system of power, corruption, and racism in Charleston has truly begun. One slap changed everything. No longer will fate lie in the hands of the strong, but now justice will decide. The gavel of Eleanor Carter had just struck, its echo lingering like a cold, stern reminder. But outside the courtroom window, Charleston woke up as if nothing had ever happened. The ancient oak trees cast their shadows down over the cobblestone streets. The Georgian-style houses stood elegantly beside the gentle Cooper River, an enchanting beauty yet full of deception. Charleston had long been known as one of the most beautiful cities in the South. Tourists loved the city for its grace, sophistication, and the nostalgia of its cobbled streets, leisurely horse-drawn carriages, and the countless grand mansions that once belonged to wealthy families of history. But those who had lived here for a long time knew well that behind the splendid and tranquil exterior was a harsh truth. A city that had never shaken off the ghost of racism and the inequalities that had deeply rooted through generations. From her seat of power, Eleanor had witnessed countless cases that exposed the darkest corners of Charleston. Police brutality covered up by networks of protection, young black men jailed on vague charges, or simply because they couldn't afford a lawyer. She had spent her youth as a public defender, fighting for the most vulnerable, and continued down that path as a prosecutor, using the power of the law to clean up the rot hidden beneath the city's majestic beauty. Eleanor Carter was a symbol of integrity, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a calm face like still water, but within her burned a fierce fire. She was born and raised in Charleston, enough to understand every alley and corner of the city, enough to feel the fleeting looks of prejudice when she entered places that were traditionally reserved for the wealthy white elite. Yet, Eleanor had never let those prejudices deter her. She had risen to the bench not just to judge, but to challenge the limits, to prove that justice knew no color or status. But the road had never been easy. From the very first day of her appointment, Eleanor knew that every step she took would be a quiet battle against a system that was reluctant to change, especially coming from a black woman. Today, in the courtroom, the slap from Travis Boone seemed to exemplify the hostility she had always faced. But it was that very arrogance from the officer that opened the opportunity Eleanor had been waiting for, a chance to expose the rot beneath Charleston's flawless facade. Across the room, Travis stood frozen, his palm still numb from the strike he had just delivered. At that moment, the confidence that had always surrounded him began to crack into pieces. Travis Boone was born into a long line of police officers in Charleston. He grew up with the belief that the law was made by those in power, and that as long as you stood on the right side, no one could touch you. To Travis, the truth was simply something that could be bent to his will, and justice was a privilege, not a right. He was certain that the power network surrounding him would always protect him, no matter how severe his mistakes. But today, all that belief collapsed in the wake of a seemingly simple slap, in front of Eleanor's calm, steel-like gaze. Luke Hamilton, the young officer, stood beside Travis, trembling. He was neither strong enough nor in a position to resist or defend himself. Luke was merely a small cog in the vast power system that Travis represented, but even he understood that a small cog could easily be crushed when the machine broke down. Travis glanced at Eleanor once more. This time, his gaze held no arrogance. Instead, it was filled with unease and a growing hatred, slowly transforming into fear. Eleanor remained seated, poised and unshaken, like a statue of authority and pride, showing no sign of wavering. It was that composure that chilled Travis, for he knew it came from absolute confidence and a deep understanding of the system he was desperately clinging to. "Mr. Travis Boone," Eleanor spoke, her voice soft yet brimming with power. "From this moment on, your actions are no longer a matter for the city police department. I hereby officially open an investigation into your assault on a sitting judge." Travis's heart suddenly raced, and he could almost hear the collapse of an entire power structure he had always believed would protect him to the end. Meanwhile, Eleanor locked her gaze on Travis without a hint of hesitation, for she knew that the greatest battle of her life had just begun. But now she was ready to expose everything that Charleston had hidden behind its two-faced beauty, a beauty that had lived too long in the shadows. Before that slap echoed like thunder on a clear day, Eleanor had sensed something unusual the moment she stepped into the courtroom that morning. It wasn't just the tension in the air, but the covert, probing stares, the quick glances that avoided hers whenever she turned toward them. After more than 30 years working within the Charleston justice system, Eleanor knew that her instincts were never wrong. When she entered the room, Eleanor had not yet donned her judge's robe. She wanted to take a few brief moments to review the case file. It was the case of a black teenager, Marcus Jameson, accused of vandalizing public property. A minor case, but Eleanor always believed that no case was too small when it involved a human life. However, that morning, Eleanor was not just preoccupied with Marcus. She could feel the pressure emanating from the corner of the room, where Travis Boone stood waiting impatiently. Eleanor knew all too well about Travis, a third-generation police officer in a long-established Charleston family, whose power had been built on a tangled network of relationships and an underground system of protection from the city's elite. Over the years, Eleanor had heard and read countless reports about Travis Boone: abuse of power, excessive force when arresting suspects, and especially how he dealt with black cases, coldly and ruthlessly. But every time, the accusations were quickly swept away, brushed under the luxurious rugs of the city's government. Eleanor quietly moved toward the table to retrieve the case file. Just then, she heard Travis's voice, authoritative yet full of arrogance, call out behind her, "Hey, you! Bring me the Jameson case files now." She didn't turn around immediately, trying to maintain her calm as she skimmed the final lines of the file. Eleanor understood that Travis was deliberately provoking her, but she had never allowed anyone to disturb her composure, especially not before a trial began. But Travis, with his excessive confidence and the protection of his power, could not tolerate being ignored by a black woman. He strode forward, his angry breath close to Eleanor's neck, and raised his voice again. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Eleanor remained silent, but her silence, firm and resolute, seemed to strike at the very pride of Travis. Losing patience and unable to maintain his facade, he instinctively resorted to using force and intimidation to assert dominance. With a swift, brutal swing of his hand, he struck Eleanor's right cheek. The sharp sound of the slap reverberated throughout the courtroom, and all other noise instantly stopped. Eyes turned toward them in shock and horror. In that moment, Eleanor felt the sting on her skin as if fire had been ignited, but she refused to react with fear or weakness. Travis stood frozen, still panting, his hand hanging in the air, as if he couldn't believe what he had just done. The young officer, Luke Hamilton, standing beside Travis, looked pale and stepped back in fear. He recognized something his superior hadn't. The slap had struck directly at the very system that protected them. Eleanor turned to face Travis, her gaze as cold as ice, slicing through his aggressive stance. Her eyes didn't contain fiery rage, but rather a stern, penetrating judgment. It was the gaze of someone who had spent a lifetime in pursuit of justice, who had fought countless battles and understood the price of every wrongful action. In the heavy silence that enveloped the room, Eleanor calmly walked toward the judge's bench. Each of her steps was slow, deliberate, like the ticking of a countdown clock, each step carrying the weight of a decision about to be made. Finally, Eleanor donned her black robe of authority, looking down at the courtroom with an air of calm but commanding power, speaking clearly. "I am Eleanor Carter, the presiding judge of today's trial." That simple sentence caused the courtroom to tremble with shock. Travis felt an icy chill run down his spine, fear for the first time clearly visible in his eyes. That slap wasn't just a personal mistake. It was a public declaration of defiance against the very justice system Eleanor represented. Eleanor fixed her gaze directly on Travis, her eyes holding a quiet promise, but one full of weight. She would not allow that slap to be swept away, would not let anyone stand above the law, no matter how powerful they were. Today's trial may have started unusually, but Eleanor knew, with that slap, the real battle for justice in Charleston had only just begun. The moment Eleanor donned her black robe and declared her identity, the entire room seemed to have the air sucked out of it. Travis Boone stood frozen in place, his heart pounding wildly, sweat starting to drip down from his temples. Just moments ago, he had been a ruler, accustomed to seeing others bow before his power. But now, right here in this courtroom, Travis realized he had made a fatal mistake, a mistake that no power could easily erase. Eleanor sat upright on the judge's bench, her expression stern, her gaze cold but calm, sweeping across the room, lingering just a little longer when it met Travis's eyes. The tense silence stretched on, so suffocating that every breath felt labored for those present. "Mr. Travis Boone," Eleanor spoke, her voice clear and sharp, each word ringing in the minds of everyone present like the toll of a bell. "As the presiding judge of today's trial, I declare that you have committed an act of violence against a sitting judge. I am hereby officially ordering a criminal investigation into your actions, effective immediately." Eleanor's cutting, decisive tone stunned everyone in the room. Lawyers, the clerk, the officers standing behind, all stood frozen, not daring to move. Luke Hamilton, Travis's young colleague, was pale, his eyes frantically darting around, searching for some miracle. But all he found were averted gazes and the oppressive silence. Travis instinctively took a step forward, about to speak in his defense, but the stern, unwavering look in Eleanor's eyes stopped him in his tracks. "Your Honor, I didn't know you were—" "You not knowing who I am is irrelevant," Eleanor cut him off, her words as sharp as a blade. "What matters is that you just assaulted a judicial officer right here in this courtroom. And that action not only targets me, but it's an attack on the very justice system you swore to uphold." Travis swallowed hard, the reality of the situation beginning to sink in. For the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. All the power, connections, and protections he had always relied on now seemed distant and useless. He glanced around the room, desperately searching for a familiar face that might step forward to protect him. But today, no one dared to stand up for Travis. Everyone knew that Eleanor Carter was someone who couldn't be intimidated or compromised. "Please, Your Honor, allow me to speak." Travis tried again, his voice trembling, the arrogance he once wore now reduced to a shadow of the past. "I won't stop you from speaking," Eleanor replied calmly, "but you should remember everything you say from this moment forward will be included in the criminal investigation record." Her words hit Travis like a bucket of cold water, causing him to freeze, speechless. At that moment, he truly understood that he had no control left. The years of protection, concealment, and tolerance afforded to him by the underground power structures of Charleston were now crumbling right before his eyes. Eleanor slowly turned to the court clerk, her voice soft but firm, filled with authority. "Please make a note in the case file that I, Judge Eleanor Carter, have officially ordered a criminal investigation into Officer Travis Boone for assaulting and threatening a sitting judge." The clerk hurriedly nodded, hands trembling as he wrote, his wide eyes still in shock. The room remained enveloped in absolute silence. Eleanor stood up, locking eyes with Travis one final time. "Mr. Boone, today you will understand that true power does not lie in who has more strength, but in the truth and justice, and from this day forward, justice is what you will face, whether you're ready for it or not." Travis had no more words left to say. He stood frozen, his face pale as someone who had just lost everything, for he knew that Eleanor Carter wasn't just speaking empty words. What she had just declared would change the course of his life forever. Eleanor turned, walking out of the courtroom, her black robe flowing behind her like a banner of victory. Travis stood there, alone and powerless, watching the woman he had so carelessly disregarded just minutes ago, now a towering symbol of justice. Today, Travis Boone had lost everything. But for Eleanor Carter, the battle for justice had only just begun. As soon as Eleanor left the courtroom, her trusted assistant, Carter Lang, was waiting outside. Carter, a seasoned former police officer with a tall, imposing frame and calm eyes, had an unshakable loyalty to Eleanor behind his quiet demeanor. Looking at Eleanor's resolute expression, Carter understood that this fight was not just about Travis Boone. It was much larger, and he was ready to stand by her side until the end. "Carter, I want all the files on Travis Boone delivered to my office immediately," Eleanor ordered softly but clearly as they walked down the vast hallway of the courthouse. Carter nodded quickly without hesitation. That evening, Eleanor's office remained lit through the night. The files on Travis Boone were stacked high on her desk, each page containing dark secrets he had worked hard to hide. Eleanor carefully flipped through each document while Carter stood by, diligently taking notes. "I can't believe this," Carter sighed, looking up at Eleanor with a barely contained anger. At least 7 cases involving police violence were either dropped or altered suspiciously, and Boone was directly involved in all of them. Eleanor frowned, her gaze fixed on an important detail. Who signed off on the dismissal of these cases? "Carson Ramsey," Carter answered immediately. "Senior Assistant Prosecutor. He's been consistently protecting Boone from serious charges." The name Ramsey made Eleanor's heart sink. She was no stranger to Carson Ramsey, a powerful figure in the judicial system, always appearing in expensive suits with a polished smile and smooth words. But Eleanor knew that beneath that perfect exterior was a man driven by ambition, willing to do anything to protect his position and power. "Ramsey couldn't have done this on his own," Eleanor said softly, as though contemplating something deeper. "There must be someone higher up helping him cover up these wrongdoings." Carter paused for a moment, then gently placed an older file in front of Eleanor. "There's another name that keeps appearing in the cases involving Boone. I think you need to be prepared for this." Eleanor slowly opened the file. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the familiar signature on the important documents. It was the signature of Benjamin Howcroft, an esteemed senior judge who had once been a mentor, the man who had guided her and helped her take her first steps in this challenging judicial career. "Ben Howcroft," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling for the first time since the case began. A man she had respected and trusted, a symbol of fairness and integrity in Charleston, now implicated in these scandalous and corrupt cases. "Yes," Carter confirmed, his eyes briefly showing a trace of sorrow, knowing how much this would hurt Eleanor. It seems Judge Howcroft was the one who signed off on dropping the most serious charges against Travis. Eleanor fell silent for a moment, a mixture of pain, disappointment, and anger welling up inside her. Benjamin Howcroft had once been the role model she looked up to, a dedicated, sharp judge who had taught her about courage and justice. But now, the same man was entangled in the corrupt system she was fighting to dismantle. "He once told me that justice should never be compromised," Eleanor murmured, almost to herself, more than to Carter, "and now he's the one who has betrayed that promise." Carter moved closer to Eleanor, his voice firm and warm. "You're not alone in this fight. If this system is rotten from the inside, we'll tear it apart, no matter who's behind it." Eleanor looked up at Carter, a fleeting look of gratitude in her eyes. Her resolve returned stronger than ever. She slammed the file onto the desk, her voice returning to its familiar, sharp decisiveness. "Carter, we're not just investigating Travis Boone anymore. I want all the files related to Carson Ramsey, Benjamin Howcroft, and anyone who helped them cover up their wrongdoings to be brought to light and clarified. No exceptions, no compromises." Carter nodded resolutely, fully aware that this was no mere investigation. It was a life-or-death battle to reclaim the soul and justice of Charleston. At that moment, Eleanor Carter was no longer just a judge sitting on the bench. She had become the center of a storm that was beginning to form, ready to expose all the rotten truths that had been corroding the judicial system she had dedicated her life to protect and preserve. When Eleanor decided to expose the corruption within the Charleston justice system, she knew she was sparking an inevitable battle. But there were things she hadn't anticipated. The fact that her enemies were willing to cross every ethical boundary, targeting her greatest vulnerability, her family. One Monday morning, as the soft Charleston sunlight filtered through her office window, Eleanor sat at her desk, carefully reviewing case files from past trials. Her personal phone suddenly vibrated, a text message from an unknown number with no identifying sender. Eleanor calmly opened the message, but her heart instantly stopped as she read the cold, menacing words. "You should know your place." There are things worth more than justice, aren't there, Judge Carter? Attached to the message was a blurry photo, but clear enough for her to immediately recognize the person in it. Her only grandson, 13-year-old Jacob, carefree as he biked down the familiar road from school to their home in Mount Pleasant. Jacob had no idea he was being secretly followed and photographed. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly, not out of fear for herself, but because of the unease and anger that gripped her at the thought that her family had become a target. Her enemies wanted her to feel that their power could reach anyone she loved the most. It was a chilling warning, meant to force her to abandon the fight she was so determined to continue. But Eleanor Carter was not one to easily be subdued. She had spent years facing down the dark forces of Charleston, had endured hateful glances and cruel mockery, yet she had never backed down in the face of pressure or threats. Keeping her calm, Eleanor slowly called Carter Lang. A few minutes later, Carter appeared in her office, his face serious when he saw the rare look of concern in her eyes. "What's happened, Eleanor?" Carter asked quietly, his voice filled with concern. She silently handed him her phone, showing the photo and the message she had just received. Carter studied the details carefully, his face hardening with anger and worry. "They're starting to attack your family now," Carter said softly, his voice trembling with fury. "They want you to give up the investigation." "I know," Eleanor replied gently, struggling to contain the anger boiling within her. "But they've made a huge mistake. Instead of scaring me, they've forced me to act more decisively." Carter looked at Eleanor with both concern and admiration. He knew she would never back down, but this time the danger was far too close. "We have to do something to ensure Jacob and your family's safety first," Carter said, choosing his words carefully. "You can't ignore this threat." Eleanor nodded, her eyes shining with resolve. "I won't let them harm my loved ones. Call in the federal security, Carter. I want them to protect my family immediately. Jacob, my sister, and the house in Mount Pleasant need to be under 24/7 surveillance." Carter didn't hesitate, immediately pulling out his phone to make the necessary call. Eleanor sat there, staring out the window, a deep sadness settling in her heart. She knew that with this move, the battle between her and the shadowy figures behind Travis Boone had crossed a line. From now on, this wasn't just a fight against corrupt individuals. It had become a life-or-death struggle to protect everything she held dear. Later that afternoon, a team of federal agents quietly arrived at Mount Pleasant, swiftly establishing a security perimeter around Eleanor's family home. Jacob was discreetly picked up and dropped off at school each day by an unmarked vehicle, under strict surveillance. Eleanor felt some relief knowing her family was safe, but she understood that the real battle had just begun. In the days that followed, Eleanor continued to receive more veiled threats, each message growing more direct and ominous. "Do you really think federal protection can keep you safe forever? One day, they'll let their guard down. Don't wait until it's too late to regret this, Judge." But Eleanor remained silent, offering no response. She kept delving deeper into the files on Travis Boone, Carson Ramsey, and Judge Halcroft, determined to uncover the full truth, even though she knew that the deeper she went, the greater the danger became. Her latest discoveries revealed that not only Ramsey and Halcroft, but also greater political forces in Charleston had been secretly shielding Travis Boone for years. Eleanor understood that behind the city's seemingly transparent relationships lay a dark web of power, a demonic alliance, willing to do whatever it took to protect their own interests. She wondered, was Travis Boone really just a small cog in a much larger system? How many more terrifying secrets were hidden by those pulling the strings behind the scenes? Eleanor knew she was facing an uneven battle, but it was one she could not escape. She looked down at the photo of Jacob on her desk, the boy, carefree with a bright smile. That was all the reason she needed to keep fighting. Eleanor clenched her fist, silently promising herself she would never let fear defeat justice. Charleston was overdue for change, and if this battle needed someone brave enough to step up, no matter the danger, Eleanor was ready to be that person. At that moment, she was no longer just a judge. She had become a symbol of truth and hope, determined to unearth the darkness that had shrouded Charleston for too long. The threats targeting Eleanor's family were just the first sign of a more intense battle to come. Just days after she increased security for her grandson Jacob, the shadowy power network behind Travis Boone revealed itself, launching a full-scale campaign of retaliation aimed at destroying the reputation and credibility Eleanor had built over 3 decades. One morning, Eleanor walked into her office and immediately sensed something unusual in the looks of the courthouse staff. People who always greeted her warmly suddenly avoided eye contact, and lively conversation ceased as she walked by. Eleanor immediately felt that something was wrong, and that feeling was quickly confirmed when Carter rushed into her office, his face more serious than she had ever seen. "Eleanor, you need to see this right now," Carter said, placing a tablet in front of her. On the screen were a series of newly published articles, with sensational and malicious headlines. Judge Eleanor Carter, shocking private life secrets revealed. Insider source, Eleanor Carter favors black suspects due to political motives. The words seemed like daggers piercing straight into Eleanor's honor and dignity. She quickly skimmed through the articles, each sentence carefully crafted to plant doubt and animosity in the public's mind. Baseless stories about her receiving money from civil rights organizations, claims of her abusing her power to free dangerous black criminals, and even insinuations about her personal past were ruthlessly exploited, despite being entirely fabricated. Eleanor set the tablet down, her hand trembling, not from anger but from a deep sadness. She had always known that when she fought against the old power structures, retaliation would come sooner or later. But she hadn't expected her enemies to attack her honor so ruthlessly and maliciously. Carter looked at Eleanor with deep concern. "They've planned this very carefully, Eleanor. It's no coincidence that all the media outlets are simultaneously spreading these lies." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Someone powerful is definitely behind this, orchestrating this campaign. They want to bring me down before I can take my next step." Carter furrowed his brow. "But you're not going to fall for it so easily." Eleanor gave a faint smile, her eyes igniting with familiar resolve. "They've made a mistake thinking I'll surrender to public pressure. I won't let them get what they want." While Eleanor and Carter worked to defend against the smear campaign elsewhere in Charleston, Travis Boone was also facing intense pressure. Travis, now a wounded beast, isolated and facing the very real threat of imprisonment, knew that Eleanor was not someone who could be easily subdued. But a call from an anonymous number had changed everything. "Travis," a cold voice spoke on the other end. "You know the kind of damage you've caused, right?" Travis gripped the phone, his throat dry. "I know, but there's nothing more I can do. Carter has taken the case to the feds." The voice on the other end responded with calm authority. "You still have a chance to fix this. Eleanor Carter is becoming a major problem for all of us. We need you to act stronger." A warning powerful enough to make her understand that she can't win this fight. Travis fell silent, his breath quickening. He understood the implications behind the order. This wasn't just a slap like last time. This time, he would have to do something far more serious, something that could push Eleanor to the brink. "What if I don't?" Travis probed. The voice on the other end chuckled softly, coldly. "You know what will happen if you refuse, Travis. We've protected you all this time, but there are limits to every protection. If you don't do this, all the real files on you will be sent straight to Mrs. Carter. At that point, even Judge Halcroft won't be able to save you." The call ended abruptly, leaving Travis drowning in despair and panic. He realized now that he was trapped between an even more terrifying force than Eleanor Carter, those operating in the shadows, with unseen power, willing to crush anyone to protect their interests. Travis put the phone down, staring blankly into space, his mind torn. On one side was the risk of losing everything, imprisonment and disgrace. On the other, the brutal command that forced him to continue committing crimes. He suddenly understood that he was just a pawn in the vast, ruthless power game of Charleston. But now, Travis had no other choice. He opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out a handgun that had been secretly kept for a long time. He knew that what he was about to do would mark a point of no return, a warning strong enough, harsh enough to make Eleanor stop, or at least hesitate. Outside the window, darkness began to fall over Charleston, as if to shield the dark plan Travis was now set to execute. In the silent room, Travis trembled as he looked at the gun, knowing that from this moment on he could never go back to his old life. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor stood firm by her office window, looking out over the bustling streets below. She could feel that the battle had reached its peak. But Eleanor had made a decision long ago. No matter how thick the darkness was, she would never step back. To save Charleston, she was ready to face everything, even if it cost her life. As the darkness enveloped Charleston, Eleanor Carter knew she could no longer stand by and wait. The retaliation from the shadows was clear, vicious, and direct. Now she understood. This battle was no longer just a case, but a fight to reclaim the soul of a decaying system manipulated by invisible powers. Immediately following the media smear campaign against her, Eleanor received a call from federal agent Rosalind Keene. Rosalind was a strong, sharp woman, known for her cold, decisive manner and her expertise in corruption cases and power protection. Eleanor knew that Rosalind was someone she could trust absolutely in this critical moment. They met in a secure office in the Federal Center, heavily protected. Rosalind Keene sat across from Eleanor, her sharp eyes focused on the classified documents they had just gathered. On the table were numerous files, recordings, and evidence showing that the network protecting Travis Boone wasn't just a small conspiracy, but a complex underground organization run by the true power players of the city. "They want you to stay silent," Rosalind said bluntly, her eyes never leaving Eleanor's. "The media campaign was just the tip of the iceberg, but we've traced the connections, and now we have enough evidence to expose the entire network." Eleanor looked at Rosalind with determination. "I'm ready to pay any price to bring the truth to light. But we must act quickly. Travis Boone has just received a more forceful order, and I believe he's about to do something extremely dangerous." Rosalind nodded and placed a file on the table, opening it in front of Eleanor. Inside were images, documents, and classified reports showing a vast network of senior police officers, prosecutors, and even some of the most powerful politicians in the city. Among the names listed, Eleanor recognized several familiar figures, notably Carson Ramsey and Judge Benjamin Halcroft. "We've gathered evidence that Carson Ramsey didn't just cover up Boone's cases, but also received large bribes from the economic powers behind him," Rosalind explained. "But the most dangerous person is Benjamin Halcroft. He's been protecting this network from within the courts for years." Eleanor sighed, her voice tinged with bitterness. "I never thought the man who mentored me could betray justice like this, but no matter who he is, I will bring him into the light." Rosalind nodded, her resolve firm. "We'll work with you to expose them all, but first we need to catch Travis Boone. He's a crucial link, holding many of the network's secrets. If we can force him to talk, their entire system will collapse." Just then, Rosalind's phone rang. An agent's voice came through urgently. "We've located Travis Boone. He's heading towards Judge Carter's house." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She stood up quickly, panic flashing in her eyes for the first time. "Jacob, they're targeting my family again." "No, don't worry," Rosalind quickly reassured her, giving orders into the phone. "Seal off all the roads around Carter's house. Don't let him get any closer." Immediately, a network of federal security was activated. Agents swiftly deployed, surrounding the area around the house in Mount Pleasant. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Rosalind rushed to the scene, Eleanor's heart pounding as she silently prayed for the safety of her loved ones. At that same moment, Travis Boone was getting closer to the house. He drove slowly down familiar streets, his mind conflicted. He knew that today's actions would trap him in a dead end. But the voice of the shadowy figure echoed in his mind, unrelenting. Either Eleanor Carter stops, or you'll be crushed. As Travis stopped his car to observe, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Unfamiliar vehicles lined the streets, strange faces silently watching his every move. Travis panicked, realizing he had been made. He frantically started the engine, attempting to flee, but it was too late. In an instant, dozens of federal agents appeared from all directions, guns drawn, surrounding Travis from every side. Rosalind Keene was the first to step forward, her cold, commanding gaze locking onto him as she spoke into a loudspeaker. "Travis Boone, you are surrounded. Surrender immediately. Don't make this worse." Travis gripped the steering wheel, his breath coming in quick gasps. He knew there was no escape. His trembling hands slowly raised, and he stepped out of the car, facing the guns aimed directly at him. As Eleanor and Rosalind approached, Travis's eyes met Eleanor's. For the first time, she saw true desperation in his eyes. No longer the arrogance, only fear and defeat. "You've won, Eleanor," Travis whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This isn't my victory," Eleanor replied, her voice stern but tinged with pity. "This is the victory of justice, Travis, and this is just the beginning." Travis fell silent, lowering his head as the agents led him away in handcuffs. Eleanor watched his retreating figure, knowing that the real battle against this dark network was only beginning. But from this moment on, she was no longer alone. She had Rosalind Keene, Carter Lang, and Justice standing beside her, ready for a fierce pursuit to expose the shadowy figures who had manipulated Charleston for far too long. From the moment Travis Boone was led away in handcuffs, witnessed by Eleanor and Rosalind Keene, Eleanor understood that this battle had entered an entirely new phase. Capturing Travis was just the beginning. The true target was the person behind him, the ones who had been manipulating the system and protecting him all these years, the ones she needed to expose. Eleanor didn't hesitate. That very evening, she and Rosalind returned to the Federal Investigation Center, a large room filled with digital screens and piles of classified documents covering the table. Carter Lang was also there, his face serious as he joined Eleanor and Rosalind in reviewing the evidence gathered from Travis Boone's arrest. In the quiet room, they silently watched footage taken from hidden cameras installed by federal agents at the secret meeting spots between Travis and his accomplices. Each clear image appeared on the screen, capturing clandestine meetings between Travis Boone, Carson Ramsey, the powerful senior assistant prosecutor, and notably Judge Benjamin Howcroft, who had once been Eleanor's mentor. The evidence was undeniable and irrefutable. In one key video, Howcroft, as calm as ever, spoke to Travis in his steady voice. "Keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Carson and I will make sure no case touches you. Just remember, always know where the limit lies." The familiar voice sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. It was Howcroft, the man who had taught her the first lessons of judicial ethics. Now, he was breaking all of those principles, using his power and influence to shamelessly twist justice. Rosalind turned to Eleanor, her voice resolute. "We have enough evidence to indict not only Ramsey and Howcroft, but several high-ranking officials in Charleston's government. Once this evidence is made public, no one will be able to cover for them anymore." Eleanor gazed at the screen, where the faces of the powerful men and women appeared, smiling, confident they were beyond the reach of the law. "It's time to end this, Rosalind. Release all the evidence. We need to let the people of Charleston know the truth." The very next morning, Eleanor and Rosalind held an emergency press conference right outside the city courthouse. A crowd of reporters crowded the steps, microphones and cameras trained on Eleanor as she stepped up to the podium. She took a deep breath before speaking, her gaze unwavering as she addressed the cameras. "Today, we are releasing clear evidence of a serious corruption and protection network that has existed within the Charleston justice system for many years," Eleanor began, her voice firm and commanding. Behind her, a large screen showed video clips and audio recordings being made public one by one. Ramsey quietly discussing with Travis about dismissing serious charges, Howcroft calmly promising that no one would dare to touch Travis as long as he remained in power, and documents showing large sums of money being transferred into the anonymous accounts of relatives of high-ranking officials. Charleston was shaken to its core by the vivid, undeniable evidence. The public, long suspicious of what lurked behind the polished exterior of the city, was now confronted with the horrifying truth about a justice system deeply manipulated by corruption. Within hours of the press conference, numerous arrest warrants and suspensions were carried out across the city. Carson Ramsey, surprised and furious, was escorted out of his office by federal agents in broad daylight. Judge Benjamin Howcroft, once the most respected figure in the court, walked heavily with empty eyes as he was led away by police, his colleagues looking on in shock. But it didn't stop with the two major figures. Several senior leaders within the police department and local government were also immediately suspended, as evidence showed they had either directly or indirectly been involved in protecting Travis and covering up years of corruption. News of the case spread quickly throughout the city, sparking a wave of anger in the community. Social justice groups, the Black community, and those who had suffered under the network gathered outside the courthouse, holding banners demanding that justice be fully enforced. Eleanor looked down at the crowd from her office window, a mix of relief and responsibility weighing on her heart. She knew that exposing this power network was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey ahead. She would have to face fierce opposition from the remaining forces, those willing to do whatever it took to protect their privileges and interests. But now, Eleanor was no longer alone. By her side was Rosalind Keene, Carter Lang, the federal security team, and the people of Charleston, those who were waking up, ready to stand with her to fight against injustice and corruption. "The battle's not over," Eleanor said softly to Rosalind as they stood together, watching police cars pull away from the courthouse. "But at least, from today on, they will know that no one can stand above justice forever." Rosalind nodded, her gaze sharp but full of hope. "And we'll keep fighting, Eleanor, until this city is truly restored to justice." The two women stood there, looking down at Charleston, where the greatest earthquake in its modern history had just occurred. The battle to reclaim the soul of this city had truly begun, and Eleanor Carter would not stop until every truth was exposed and every shadow erased from Charleston forever. The moment the police cars disappeared from view, Eleanor felt her phone gently vibrating in her jacket pocket. On the screen, a familiar name appeared, but this time it made her heart tighten. Benjamin Howcroft. The once respected mentor was now one of the key links in the corrupt power network that Eleanor had been methodically exposing. Eleanor hesitated for a brief moment but then answered the call. The voice, once a source of comfort and encouragement during her early years, now sounded cold, distant. "Eleanor, do you realize what you've just done?" Howcroft's voice was steady, but carried a deep warning. "I've done what I had to do," Eleanor responded calmly but firmly. "You know I cannot remain silent when I see justice being trampled like this." "Justice?" Howcroft laughed lightly, bitterly, and with sarcasm. Justice isn't as simple as you think. This city exists on a very fragile balance. What you're doing isn't building. It's destroying everything we've worked so hard to protect for decades. Eleanor gripped the phone tightly, her voice growing firmer. You call protecting someone like Travis Boone, covering up acts of brutality and corruption, protecting the balance? Howcroft sighed, a heavy silence before he spoke, his voice dropping into an ominous tone. Eleanor, I trusted and mentored you because I saw great potential in you, but you have to understand that the people you're up against are far stronger than you imagine. If you continue, the consequences will be beyond anything you can fathom. I can't turn back, Ben, Eleanor replied decisively, and no matter how powerful they are, the truth will come to light. Howcroft chuckled softly again, his voice full of bitterness and regret. You're so naive, Eleanor. The truth might save you, but sometimes it can also kill you. Don't make me watch you regret your decision today. The call ended abruptly, leaving Eleanor in chilling silence and deep turmoil. A part of her felt pain because the man she had once respected had betrayed the values he had taught her. But a greater part of her understood that this was a sign that the system was beginning to fight back fiercely, and she would have to be ready for an even tougher battle ahead. That evening, Eleanor, along with Carter Lang and Rosalind Keene, gathered in her office to review the confidential documents she had quietly kept over the years. These were personal notes, secret files, and confidential reports from inside sources. Documents she had carefully stored, always telling herself that she would only release them when absolutely necessary to protect herself and uncover the truth. Eleanor, are you sure you want to release all of this? Carter asked quietly, his eyes full of concern as he looked at the thick file in front of them. Eleanor nodded slightly, her gaze resolute. We have no other choice. They've declared war, and the public deserves to know the full truth. Rosalind, standing nearby, silently flipped through the pages. Each document revealed explosive secrets, records of major cases being interfered with, lists of bribe payments, and recordings of phone calls between Howcroft, Ramsey, and high-ranking city officials. This evidence didn't just implicate a few individuals. It exposed a vast power network manipulating everything from the courts, police, to city government. These revelations are enough to shake the entire system, Rosalind said, her face a mix of astonishment and excitement. We'll make the heads of this system accountable. Eleanor looked directly into Rosalind's eyes, her voice unwavering. Yes. They thought I would be afraid and stay silent. But now it's time for them to realize that their biggest mistake was underestimating the power of the truth. The very next morning, the confidential files were made public across all media platforms. Charleston was rocked by the revelations. Illicit funds funneled into the accounts of high-ranking officials, cases manipulated shamelessly, and most importantly, the protective relationship between Judge Howcroft, Prosecutor Ramsey, and Travis Boone. The public's response was immediate and explosive. Thousands of people took to the streets, demanding that all those involved be held accountable. Under pressure from the public, the federal government was forced to take stronger action, initiating wide and aggressive investigations. Benjamin Howcroft and Carson Ramsey, along with many other senior officials, were quickly escorted for public questioning. The event felt like a storm ripping through the city, tearing down the barriers the old power system had built to protect itself. From her office, Eleanor quietly watched the collapse of a system she had once been a part of. She knew the battle wasn't over, and the powerful people behind it wouldn't easily accept defeat. But now, She also understood more clearly than ever before. Real power didn't lie with the strongest, but with those who dared to stand for justice. Eleanor turned to Carter and Rosalind, her eyes glowing with renewed confidence. "We've stirred the waves, and no matter what, I will stand firm." They looked at each other, knowing that from this point on, nothing could stop the journey to reclaim justice for Charleston. No matter how powerful and stubborn the villains were, they would have to face the unshakable power of the truth that Eleanor Carter was determined to protect at all costs. Once the truth was revealed, it could not be retracted. After Eleanor released the classified documents about the corrupt power network in Charleston, the entire city's public attention and judicial authorities turned to a long-awaited trial. The trial of Travis Boone. For the first time in modern Charleston history, this trial wasn't just about prosecuting a single police officer. It was a trial of an entire system of corruption and abuse of power that had lasted for decades. That morning, the sky over Charleston was unusually overcast. Gray clouds loomed over the city, almost as if foreshadowing the tension and drama about to unfold in the courtroom. All around the courthouse, thousands of citizens gathered early, holding up signs demanding justice, protesting the corrupt judicial system, and cheering for Eleanor Carter, the woman who had bravely stood up against the powers in the shadows. As Eleanor appeared at the courthouse doors, she was not wearing her usual judge's robe, but instead a simple yet dignified suit. Her eyes were filled with resolve and calm. Her appearance immediately drew special attention. Media cameras flashed toward her, as they understood well that today she was not just an ordinary witness. She was a symbol of resistance, a symbol of justice and courage standing up against injustice. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was taut as a violin string. This time, the judge's seat was occupied by a newly appointed federal judge, someone from outside the city to ensure absolute impartiality. Travis Boone sat at the defendant's table, his face pale, stiff with tension. His eyes avoided direct contact, his hands trembling beneath the table, struggling to suppress the rising fear within him. The trial began swiftly, with each charge being read out in chilling detail. Assaulting a judge, abuse of power, witness intimidation, colluding with high-ranking officials to cover up criminal acts. Travis listened to each accusation, his face growing paler, but he still tried to maintain a calm exterior. When Eleanor stepped up to the witness stand, the entire courtroom fell into complete silence. Every eye was fixed on her. The woman who had once held the highest seat on the bench, now in a completely different position. She stood tall, her voice strong and clear, as she recounted the details of the fateful slap, the threats her family had faced, and the pressures and dangers she had endured throughout her fight. Travis's defense attorney tried to attack Eleanor, questioning her motivations for revealing the classified documents. Eleanor responded calmly, her eyes shining with confidence and determination. "My only motive is to protect justice and the truth. The city of Charleston has suffered under the shadow of corruption and injustice for too long. I cannot remain silent while innocent people are trampled by those who are supposed to protect them." Her decisive and convincing response left the courtroom in silence. The jurors looked at her with admiration and trust. In contrast, Travis became increasingly frantic, realizing that the protective network that had shielded him was beginning to crumble. The next witnesses took the stand, each providing evidence and testimony that pushed Travis further into despair. Rosalind Keene detailed the findings from the federal investigation. Records of bribery transfers, audio recordings of secret calls between Travis, Carson Ramsey, and Judge Howcroft. Each piece of evidence, each witness brought the vast network of power behind Travis into clearer view than ever before. When Judge Benjamin Howcroft took the stand as a defendant in the case, the courtroom erupted with an intensity never seen before. Howcroft, once a symbol of justice in Charleston, now stood before the public with a bitter look in his eyes, silently listening to the charges against him. His appearance and fall from grace marked the complete collapse of faith in the old judicial system in the city. After several days of intense proceedings, the trial finally reached its conclusion. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. Travis Boone stood, hearing his sentence with a completely blank expression. He was found guilty on all charges, including assault, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. The trial ended, but its reverberations would last forever in the hearts of Charleston's people. As Travis was escorted out of the courtroom, Eleanor watched his figure retreat, feeling no joy in his conviction. She knew that what mattered more than Travis's verdict was the beginning of the collapse of the entire protective network and corruption behind him, a collapse that could not be saved. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in joy. They chanted Eleanor's name, calling her a symbol of justice and courage. But Eleanor understood that this was only the first step in a long and difficult journey ahead. Looking out at the hopeful faces directed toward her, Eleanor silently promised herself that she would never stop. For she was not only fighting for herself, she was fighting for justice, for conscience, and for the soul of Charleston. The historic trial did not only mark the end of Travis Boone's infamous life and career, but also created a massive shockwave within the Charleston judicial system and across the state of South Carolina. As the vehicle escorting Travis disappeared from Eleanor's view, she knew well that this was not the end, but rather the beginning of an unprecedented wave of reform. The very next day, under the soft golden dawn of Charleston, Eleanor walked into her office with a heavy heart, yet filled with hope. On her desk were piles of files, old cases related to Travis Boone, now being reinvestigated under the intense pressure of public opinion and the determined actions of the federal government. Carter Lang and Rosalind Keene quickly joined the efforts, working tirelessly to review every small detail of each old case. They uncovered a terrifying reality. Numerous wrongful convictions, unjust arrests, and harsh sentences aimed at the black community in Charleston, many of which had direct involvement from Travis Boone and the high-ranking officials who had protected him for years. Under strong public and media pressure, the governor of South Carolina was forced to announce the creation of a special investigation committee to cleanse the state's judicial system. Not only Charleston, but all cases showing signs of foul play were now being required to be reinvestigated in a fair and transparent manner. The press kept reporting new shocking discoveries daily. The public, once trusting of the judicial system as a symbol of justice, now faced the ugly truth: a network of corruption, racism, and injustice that had thrived under the surface for years. Numerous high-profile cases were re-examined, from young men wrongly imprisoned for vague accusations to retaliatory arrests carried out by Travis Boone. Each trial revealed more shocking evidence, exposing the blatant manipulation of justice by the old power system. At the same time, in deep investigations, many powerful figures who had once stood behind Travis were also brought to light. Carson Ramsey, the once powerful assistant prosecutor, had no way to escape after Travis's trial. Secret bank accounts and large bribe payments were uncovered, forcing Ramsey to bow his head and admit his crimes in court. Benjamin Howcroft, Eleanor's former mentor, had to resign in disgrace, marking an unprecedented collapse in the state's judicial history. But the public's anger grew even stronger when they discovered that the corruption network wasn't just limited to Charleston. It stretched throughout South Carolina, infiltrating the highest levels of the state government. figures once considered untouchable now faced strict investigations and serious charges. Eleanor stood at the center of this powerful wave of reform, deeply moved. She had spent her entire life fighting for justice, but never imagined that her solitary act would ignite such a huge wave of change. However, she also understood that this cleansing process would not be easy. The people who held power in the shadows would not accept defeat quietly. One late afternoon, as Eleanor wrapped up a long day of work, she found an anonymous letter placed on her desk. The letter was short, just a few lines, but full of threats. "The justice you seek will come at a price. Be careful with your next steps." Eleanor frowned slightly, her heart heavy with thought. The letter was a reminder that this battle was far from over. But she also knew she was not alone. Charleston, the entire city, stood behind her, ready to protect her and accompany her in the fight to reclaim truth and justice. Carter entered her office shortly afterward, noticing the troubled look in Eleanor's eyes. He glanced at the letter in her hand and immediately understood the situation. "Don't worry too much," Carter said gently. "This is just their last-ditch effort. The old system is crumbling, and they have nothing left but threats." Eleanor nodded, her eyes still focused on the window, where the sunset over Charleston painted the sky a deep red. "I know that, Carter. But now is the time we need to be stronger than ever. We have to ensure that justice is not only restored today, but protected forever." The wave of reform continued to spread across South Carolina in the following weeks. Each trial, each case being reinvestigated, only strengthened the public's trust in a fairer, cleaner future. Eleanor became a symbol of new hope, an ideal figure for the younger generation to follow in the fight against injustice and racism. But she knew well that the reverberations from this historic trial would not stop in the present. It would echo for many years to come, a profound reminder that no system could last forever if it was built on injustice and lies. Eleanor looked up at the sky, now turning a deep violet over Charleston. Her battle wasn't over, but she was ready to continue. She knew that from this moment on, every step she took would have the entire city standing behind her. Together, they would write a new chapter in history, a chapter of justice and truth. The reverberations of the wave of reform continued to spread throughout Charleston and the entire state of South Carolina, but Eleanor knew that the time had come for her to make the most important decision of her life. The threatening letters, the cryptic messages, still appeared from time to time, serving as bitter reminders that the old system had not been entirely eradicated. However, it was not these threats that made her ponder, but something much deeper. One October morning, in her familiar office, Eleanor sat by the window looking out at the long street, slowly waking up. Carter Lang entered the room, holding a stack of newspapers, and gently placed them before her. On the front page was an image of Eleanor with a large, inspiring headline, "The Woman Who Changed Charleston, a New Symbol of Justice." But Eleanor didn't smile. Her gaze was momentarily troubled as she looked at the praises written about her. She turned to Carter and quietly asked, "Do you think this change will last long if it depends on just one person like me?" Carter was briefly surprised by her question, but quickly understood the deeper meaning behind it. He looked at Eleanor with understanding and gently replied, "I think you've sparked a change far bigger than you imagined. This city will not easily return to what it was before." Eleanor nodded, her eyes still distant, gazing at the horizon. "I know, but I also understand that true justice should not and cannot depend on one individual alone. I don't want this reform to be forever tied to my name. It must belong to the people and be carried on by the next generation." Carter looked at Eleanor, his expression tinged with concern. but then he realized that her decision was well thought out. He slowly asked again, just to be sure, "You really want to step down now?" Eleanor smiled gently, her smile calm and composed, more confident and serene than ever. "This is the right time, Carter. If I stay, this reform will always bear my name, and it won't grow any bigger. I want something longer lasting, an in-depth change that can stand on its own and spread forever." Carter fell silent, looking at Eleanor with even deeper respect. He understood that she wasn't stepping down out of fear or external pressure, but because she was thinking of something bigger, a future where the change would be sustainable and not dependent on any one individual. The very next day, Eleanor held a press conference on the steps of the city courthouse, where she had once declared war against the injustice and rot within the judicial system. This time, she stood before the public with calm yet resolute eyes, clearly announcing, "I have decided to officially resign as a judge and step down from my current position. It's not because I feel I've completed everything, but because I believe it's time to hand over the leadership of this reform to younger people, to the next generations. True justice should not and cannot depend on one individual. I want this reform to become a collective responsibility for all of us." Charleston fell silent for a moment before erupting in cheers and applause, filled with deep emotion. They cheered not only for her, but also because they understood the greater message Eleanor was sending. She looked down at the crowd, seeing the faces of young people filled with enthusiasm, eyes sparkling with new hope. Among them, she saw Jacob, her grandson, looking up at her with boundless pride. Eleanor smiled faintly, her heart lighter than ever. However, not everyone agreed with her decision. After the press conference, Rosalind Keene met with Eleanor privately, her eyes full of concern and worry. "Eleanor, the city still needs you. I'm afraid that if you leave too soon, the old system will take advantage of this and recover." Eleanor gently placed her hand on Rosalind's shoulder, her voice soft yet firm. "Rosalind, this city doesn't need a lone hero. It needs a community strong enough to carry on and protect the change, and I believe we've sparked that." Rosalind looked at Eleanor, understanding that she had thought this through carefully and wouldn't change her decision. She smiled softly, nodding respectfully. "I understand. You've given us a strong foundation, and now it's our responsibility to build on it." Eleanor felt a sense of relief, as if she had just lifted a great burden. She knew her decision was the right one. A decision not just for herself, but for the future of Charleston. In the following days, the city saw continuous meetings, conferences, and movements to ensure that the reforms wouldn't stop when Eleanor left. Young people, young lawyers, and even honest public servants began to step up, more determined than ever to preserve and expand what Eleanor had started. On her last day in the office, Eleanor stood one final time, gazing at the familiar room. A sense of peace filled her heart. She had done what needed to be done, and now the new generation was ready to carry on the journey. Before leaving, Eleanor turned to look back one last time, smiling gently. She knew that this decision wasn't the end, but the beginning of something much bigger. Charleston was no longer just a city. It was a community, a movement, a promise that would live on forever, that justice would always be protected and spread, not by one individual, but by the strength and belief of all people. When the courtroom door closed behind Eleanor for the last time, she didn't feel regret or anxiety. Instead, a profound sense of peace, never felt before, spread across her mind. Gentle and soothing, like the November winds blowing through the rows of fiery red maple trees on her way home. It was the peace of someone who knew they had completed their mission and could now safely entrust everything to the next generation. Back at her small house in Mount Pleasant, which had always been her haven of peace, Eleanor felt as though she had just returned from a long journey. In the sunlit garden, Jacob, her grandson, was waiting with a bright smile. The boy, now much more mature after the events that had unfolded, ran up to embrace her, his eyes shining with pride and happiness. "Aunt Eleanor, everyone's talking about you everywhere," Jacob said cheerfully, his eyes glowing with pride. "My friends at school say you're a hero, someone who changed the city." Eleanor gently sat down on the porch steps, softly stroking Jacob's head, smiling with a gentle yet serious expression. "Jacob, I'm not a hero. What I did was just the duty of an ordinary person who had the courage to stand up for the truth." Jacob tilted his head, looking at Eleanor with a hint of confusion. "But if it wasn't for you, do you think everything would have changed like this?" Eleanor gazed out at the row of maple trees swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. Her voice was soft but full of certainty. "Jacob, there are times when change needs someone to stand up and light the way. But I didn't create this change alone. I just sparked a small flame, and it is the community that will keep that flame burning. People like you, the young ones, are the ones who will listen, embrace, and continue acting for the truth." Jacob was silent for a moment, then gently nodded, as if understanding something very important. "I understand now, Aunt Eleanor. What matters isn't what one person can do, but how everyone works together afterward, right?" Eleanor nodded proudly, looking deeply into his eyes. "Exactly, Jacob. Truth and justice are never the work of just one person. I was just the one to open the first door. Keeping that door wide open and protecting those who pass through it is the responsibility of everyone. Yours, your friends, and all of us." Jacob looked at her, his eyes full of determination. "I will always remember that. I'll tell my friends about you, about what you did, and we won't let the truth you fought for be forgotten." Eleanor gently placed her hand on Jacob's shoulder, her heart filled with emotion and happiness. This was the real legacy she wanted to leave. Not personal fame, not the veneration of one person, but the understanding and responsibility that would spread throughout the community. In the days that followed, Eleanor spent her time tending to her small flower garden, savoring each peaceful moment with her family. Charleston gradually stabilized, but the wave of reform continued to grow. The young people rose up, continuing the fight, preserving the values Eleanor had sacrificed so much to protect. She saw it in the morning news, in the conversations on the streets, in the eyes and smiles of the people whenever she passed through town. Though the memories of the tense battle occasionally passed through her mind, Eleanor never regretted her decision. She understood that the true value of those sacrifices wasn't in whether she succeeded or failed, but in the change that had been sparked and continued to spread, independent of any one individual. One peaceful evening, as the sunset gently descended over the trees, Eleanor and Jacob sat together on the garden bench. She looked at Jacob, her voice gentle yet serious. "Do you know, life is like our garden. If you only plant one flower, no matter how beautiful it is, it will eventually fade. But if you plant many flowers, nurturing and watering them every day, the whole garden will always bloom. Justice and truth are the same, Jacob. They can't rely on just one person, no matter how strong that person is. It has to be the responsibility and effort of everyone working together." Jacob listened silently, his eyes filled with contemplation, then softly spoke. "I promise you, I'll never forget that. I'll keep planting lots of flowers, just like you did, and I'll tell everyone about this garden." Eleanor smiled gently, her heart filled with joy and peace. That was all she wanted to hear, all she had worked so hard to achieve throughout her life. Outside, the evening sunlight gradually dimmed, leaving the sky ablaze with shades of orange and purple. In that moment, Eleanor knew she had completed her mission. The legacy she left behind wasn't one of fame or power, but of truth, courage, and faith in the ability of each person, no matter how small, to change the world. And it was this that would last forever, through each generation, through every story, as an eternal reminder that truth must always be illuminated, and listening and acting, that is the responsibility of all of us. The story of Judge Eleanor Carter is not just the battle of a courageous woman against a system of corruption and racism. It is a story about the power of truth, about the responsibility of each of us to uphold justice and fight for what is right. Eleanor sparked the first flame, but for that flame to keep burning, it takes the collective effort of everyone. And what about you? If you were in Eleanor Carter's shoes, would you have the courage to stand up for the truth? Please comment below to share your thoughts. Don't forget to share this story to spread the powerful message of justice and truth. And be sure to subscribe to our channel to continue following the next inspiring stories. Goodbye and see you soon.